experiencing homelessness. Reminder to everybody to speak into their mics, pull it down close to you so that it can be heard by people who are watching us remotely and by people in the room. I think everybody had a chance to review the minutes from last month's meeting. Do we have a motion or any discussion about that?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and second. Any questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Oh, I didn't do the roll call, but I will do that now. I see we have a quorum, so. David Nash, I'm here. Lance Crawford.
Here.
David Bartholomew.
Here.
Jamie Benshoff.
Here.
Elvia Diaz.
Here.
Rick Freeman.
Here.
Lacey Hoyle.
Here.
Claire Hubbard. Tricia Killian. Marcus Laws. Tim McElroy. Celeste Ordaway, and Joelle Steininger.
Here.
We have 8 members, that's a quorum. Carry on with our business. So community value for this month is our agreement to be bold. The continuum of care will remain faithful to the aggressive goals, strategies, and actions it commits to, even when there are tough decisions to be made. The COC will not settle for half measures that disregard the needs of its most vulnerable citizens. Do we have any thoughts or discussion around that? All right. We have a fairly full agenda today, so we'll motor on through it as much as we can. We do have one item to consider adding to the agenda, and we'll do that when we get to it. But I'll turn it over to Emily for updates.
Good morning. Packers are no longer in the playoffs. I don't know if you were aware. I have a few updates to share with you this morning, and some of these are things that I think David will want to chime in on. First is the point-in-time count. I know many of you participated in that. Just want to give you an event recap. We certainly don't have results yet. It will take time to compile all that data and deduplicate it and aggregate it and be able to report out. But just want to tell you that the event itself, I think, went very smoothly. We had 129 volunteers, which is an enormous number of people who are interested in this issue in our community. So really great to get that level of community engagement. Staff did an incredible job. I want to shout out to our team. Really smooth event. There are a million logistics involved in something like this, and they really did a fantastic job of making all of that work. We talked about this last month, but just a reminder that we did an expanded version of our methodology compared to prior years. So in the past, we have done the Tuesday evening street count, volunteer teams out on the street, and then the day after count at A-Hope and Haywood Street. This year we did all of that, and we did a street count the day after. We had outreach teams that went out to campsites the morning after, and then we added some service locations the day after at ABCCM Crisis Ministries. So roughly double the coverage that we've had in the past, which I think is an excellent step forward for us. We want to be sure that we have accurate data so that we can really understand who our population is, and that can inform our strategy. And also want to be sure you're aware that I think that methodology change is really likely to result in an increase in our unsheltered count, which again, we want to know that that's the case. We want accurate data. So when we have all that data compiled and we're able to share it out, we'll be able to differentiate between the numbers we would have had we just done the same methodology as in the past, and then what our full count turned out to be. Any questions about that?
I'll say thanks to the staff for a great organizational effort. That was really, it was very well organized and very smooth, and I'm sure there were some moments behind the scenes that didn't feel that way, but from the perspective of the volunteer, it was very well organized, so thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks also to Jamie for participating. She spoke at the evening count on the first day, which was a really wonderful addition, same as last year. Debbie's hair is probably going to be the same color as mine by the point in time count next year based on all of the logistics involved in this. Next, it is, and sort of related to this, it is federal reporting season for us, and by us, I mostly mean Charles. So we will report on the point-in-time count and the housing inventory count, of course, but the other two reports that we submit are the longitudinal systems analysis, which has been submitted, and the system performance measures, which has, that window for submission has just opened, so that's not yet been submitted. We'll provide a report out on those in the coming months to share that information with you, but just want to let you know that that process is happening now. And then lastly, COC related, our annual Continuum of Care, the annual Continuum of Care competition results were announced by HUD recently. All of that information is in your meeting materials, but this is our big annual funding from the federal government, so that roughly $2 million a year of federal funds for homeless and housing programs that are available to COCs across the country. Our particular amount is roughly $2 million. So you can see what was applied for in that amount column and then what was awarded in the second column. The two big takeaways are, you'll recall that the Continuum of Care application, we submit all of the projects that are received that you all approve, but we submit them in priority order based on what the funding allocations work group recommends to this body and then what you all approve. So HUD reviews in priority order. It's common to not receive all projects submitted, and common to receive awards in priority order. Does that make sense? So you'd expect to receive what you applied for as the highest priority and potentially not receive what you applied for as the lowest priority. And that was the case for us this year. So we did not, if you can scroll down, did not receive our two lowest ranked projects. One was a new project, a bonus project for rapid rehousing at Homeward Bound, and then the other was a renewal of permanent supportive housing at Homeward Bound. All other projects were awarded, and you can see that the amounts awarded are higher than what was applied for. That is related to HUD accounting for increases in fair market rent. So anytime there is a grant included in here that is a rental assistance or leasing grant, meaning it's literally paying the rent for people in a housing program, those amounts are higher than applied for to account for increases in fair market rent. Does that make sense?
I don't understand. I thought we re-voted on that priority because so many people were going to be affected. What is the fallout for not receiving the money?
You did re-vote, and that what the funding allocations work group had recommended had that lowest project, the COC bonus rapid rehousing project, was originally ranked higher. And then when you all modified their recommendation, or you voted on a difference to their recommendation, it was to put that bonus project as the lowest priority.
The result of number 9 not being funded, PSH number 3, is that 9 current residents in the community will need to shift to other subsidy funding sources. And that will have to happen, I believe, between now and July 1. I think there are other subsidy sources for those folks, so I don't think that any of them will lose housing, but that is the result of ranking that particular one lower on the scale.
All right, thank you.
The other, number 10, was a new program that, doesn't currently have any clients, so it doesn't impact anybody immediately in the community except for less resources.
Any other questions about this? Okay, well, thanks very much to you all. It is a very heavy lift to submit that application every year, and thanks especially to Help Me Into Homeward Bound for their participation. At last month's meeting, you all approved content for David to submit in the annual report to City Council, and that has been submitted. That annual report was included in your meeting materials, so no decision to make on that today, but just an update that is complete. And then lastly, we have a request for a letter of support from ABCCM for their SSVF, Supportive Services for Veteran Families, SSVF renewal, which is a federal grant from the VA. That application is due now, and the request for a letter of support from the COC is in your meeting materials. So staff will execute that if you all vote to approve that, but that is a decision to you. And then I know we have an additional request, and you want to speak to that?
Why don't we vote on the ABCCM, or if Tim wants to say anything about it?
It's for a renewal of our supportive services for veteran family grant. That, of course, is housing subsidy that we use to house veterans' families.
And it
Tim,
covers
oh,
what,
sorry, David, go ahead.
covers what geographical area, remind me?
It covers all of the western North Carolina counties other than Buncombe.
If I recall, that is a different source of funding than the HUD funds that we apply for, is that
Correct.
correct?
That's correct.
Any other questions about that? Do we have a motion to
Does,
approve it?
excuse me,
No. Sure.
and does this go along, this doesn't go along with HUD funding? Will there be data sharing within any of this?
Yes.
I can't read this. This is really tiny. I mean,
That's
this
a
is,
that's a different one.
I mean,
but
right, I
yeah, the
don't
questions would be the
see,
same.
I don't see that. I mean, I personally don't like the way this is submitted.
I can, if it's okay, I can chime in on that. SSVF projects do participate in HMIS.
Like I said, I can't really see that. I take it this is homeward bound because I know that I read it in my email this morning, so.
That's right.
But I
Yeah.
don't see a submitted letter, and I personally would like to have information submitted to me prior to a meeting that I have to vote on.
So this particular vote right now in discussion is about ABCCM's request,
Right,
which
and
was,
I don't have it. I don't
it
see
is in the meeting materials.
I didn't
It's-
see
And
it.
it's this that's on the screen here.
Okay, I've read it. I didn't see it in the meeting materials. I looked for it. I couldn't open anything, couldn't find it. So. just saying.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Am I the only one that had problems finding it?
I couldn't find it either, and I did look.
For ABCCM?
The letter itself.
Oh, so this is them requesting that we provide a letter of support. They're not submitting a letter, they're submitting this form to request that we provide a letter of support for their grant application.
Yeah, we don't write the letters for these. We put in a request, and then if the request is approved, then city, county then, manufactures the letter of support.
I see, well, like Elvia, it was very hard for me to read and follow all of that.
Yep, sorry about that.
Okay, so I'm going to say this, Tim. For being a member of the Allocation and Funding Committee for the COC, our challenge is to be bold. And the COC will not settle for half measures that disregard the needs of its most vulnerable citizens. We ask hard questions, and along with that, we didn't get answers to a lot of questions that we asked about our most vulnerable citizens when it came down to funding Code Purple. And we're still waiting for those answers. And so when we formally form our grievance committee, those things are going to have to be answered. So when you want something like a letter of recommendation and we don't have transparency with answers, it's really hard for me to say yes to you.
Okay, I'm not sure what answers, transparency you're looking for. I mean, we
They're
certainly try to be.
grievances. They're grievances, and we got no answer. We feel like because it's Code Purple, because we had no other solutions for Code Purple, we went ahead and funded Code Purple. But in the future, we really, as a follow-up to having those things answered, those questions answered, they need to be addressed. So I'm all for helping and saving people, but as far as how we do it, for harm reduction, I really wish we could have that conversation as well. So that is kind of where I sit.
Can I
Okay.
just speak to the SSBF letter of support? Feels like a separate issue.
It's not.
The grievance that you're speaking
Well,
of.
no, it is wanting a letter of support from this body, right, that says, I would like you to write something favorable about me, and I question whether I can do that because of the grievances.
So the SSVF grant for the VA provides, rapid rehousing for veterans and prevention funding. It's one of our major players in helping house homeless veterans. So I do see it as something that, and I work for the VA, so maybe I need to recuse myself from that vote or whatever, but it feels like a separate issue, the grievance piece.
Grievances are always separate when one company does 10 great things and 2 horrible things. I'm just saying it can always be that, you always have that duality, but they still need to be addressed, right?
Okay, so what I hear Elvia saying is that there is still a lingering concern around Code Purple beds at ABCCM, and I'm not sure what the details
It's not
of-
necessarily Code Purple beds, it's shelter, there's shelter grievances, questions that we asked, and I wasn't gonna address the questions. My statement is that there were questions that we asked in reference to ABCCM practices, and we did not get answers.
Okay.
And so while we wait for answers, it's hard for me to give you a favorable vote on something that you want when I have grievances that I need to address.
How many, what's the dollar amount of federal funding we're talking about here? Roughly?
Is it listed up there?
1,700,000.
Yeah.
So close to $2 million of federal money that we're applying for to come into our community to serve veterans who are experiencing homelessness and their families. So I think your concerns are heard, Elvia, but I think I'm going to ask for a motion on whether we support this federal funding application to bring resources to our community.
If I can get, some confirmation here that we can address some of the grievances, that we can have a conversation about them, that would be
I think
great.
we're always open to hear grievances and work toward appropriate resolution. I certainly am, so.
I would assume that because you have a grant writer, you read through the grants, and then when we ask questions that, when they remain unanswered, that it is either you didn't either understand the question, didn't see the question, or you read the
Okay,
reason
well,
why.
I'm not exactly sure what grievances that you're talking about, and none have been brought to me.
Sure.
If there's
Understood.
grievances brought to me, I will work through those with my agency.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the letter of support for ABCCM.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we have,
Question on point of order. I didn't hear a recusal vote, but I heard a recusal suggestion that wasn't addressed. And as I'm making notes, I'm just trying to figure out who is voting on this. Because usually a recusal
Did you
requires a vote of the
abstain?
committee.
I did not vote when
Right,
we just
well-
went around, but yes, I will abstain from voting.
So,
so do we have a motion to allow Tim and Joelle to abstain from this vote?
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, can I get another motion to approve this, this letter of support for close to $2 million of grant funding?
that
from
would
the
have
federal-
Lacey moved and Jamie seconded, right? So that motion would still be on the floor, we just.
Yeah, the motion's still on the floor. Okay, so all in favor of,
Could we do roll call vote, just so for the record it shows?
sure.
I think that would be better.
All those, the motion has been made and seconded to approve this letter of support for ABCCM's grant application. I'm going to do a roll call vote. David Nash, yes. Lance Crawford,
Yes.
David Bartholomew,
Yes.
Jamie Benshoff,
Yes.
Elvia Diaz,
Yes.
Rick Freeman,
Yes.
Lacey Hoyle,
Yes.
Marcus Laws.
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay, so at the risk of more controversy, there is another SSVF grant application that's due. This one is for $1.7 million to provide the same services that ABCCM provides in the western North Carolina counties, but in this case, it's in Buncombe County. And I will accept responsibility for missing the deadline. It's a homeward bound grant application that's due on the same time frame, and it's a significant amount of money to serve veterans and veterans' families here in Buncombe County. So I guess I would ask for a motion allowing that we add this item to the agenda. It was supposed to have been submitted, the request should have been submitted last Thursday. It didn't get submitted until yesterday. So apologies for that, but I'd like to add it to the agenda if there's no objection, or have a motion to add it to the agenda if possible. And I guess, let's say, before we start that process, I would like permission to abstain as a, at least for the moment, current employee of Homeward Bound.
Motion to remove David from voting.
All right.
Second.
I don't think Marcus needs to abstain because he's no longer working with Homeward Bound, but if anybody feels differently, please say so. Okay, so I guess I'll continue to preside, but won't vote. So can I request a motion to add this item to the agenda?
Motion to add Homeward Bound's letter of support to the agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All in, do we need a roll call vote? All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain. Any opposed? We can hear from Sarah Growell, or we can go based on the information that's in front of you that was handed out and emailed out this morning. It is the same federal funding source and the same purposes. It funds rapid rehousing and other services for veterans and veterans' families in Buncombe County.
I'm thinking about what would be a good precedent to set for our new continuum of care? And I wonder, since you're abstaining, usually someone doesn't participate in the conversation when there's a decision. Could Lance take over from this point?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, is there any discussion around this?
I'd like to hear just a few words, since there was no way I could read anything prior to this meeting.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah Grohl. I work, I'm the Veteran Rapid Rehousing Director at Homeward Bound. And I did put together this, just to kind of give you guys some idea about what I put in here is just a little bit about our program. We do rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, but also a shallow subsidies program, if you guys are familiar with that. It's kind of new. That actually allows us to pay rental assistance longer term, 2 to 4 years, depending on the situation. We can pay half of their rent for that time. We work up into 80%. Basically, our eligibility is up to 80% of the AMI. And obviously, you have to have a veteran in your household. My numbers that I projected were based off of our last year's numbers, so they're a bit of an estimate, but I did put, we hope to assist about 50 veterans in HUD-VASH deposits, so those are things that we We just do kind of one-time payments for HUD-VASH veterans. They can't pay for like a security deposit or a bed, so they use our SSVF funds to do that when they're doing a move-in. So that's what those HUD-VASH deposits are. We hope to serve at least 70 veterans in rapid rehousing. I can't see, it cuts me off in my notes, I apologize, up there. But I do have those numbers in there. Obviously, this is for the fiscal year 2025, which would start in October of 2025. And we're requesting at least the 1.7 million that we got last year. What else do I want to say about that? But yes, any questions specifically? I'm not sure exactly.
I don't have a question, but I do want to just say that the rest of that outcome is that it'll assist around 300 veterans, I believe, with homelessness prevention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those, I think those estimates are kind of low, again, because they were based off of last year's projection. The amount of people we serve in a year is super variable, just based on what's coming through VCAM and what the needs are at that specific time, especially with so many different types of programs. But we do end up helping a lot of veterans in many different ways, in many different situations. The team's been really effective and really great outcomes in the past, and we would really like to keep doing that. But yeah, I can answer any specific questions about anything that you guys want to know.
I'm confused. What is the source of funding for this? Why are we voting on it?
So it's money that comes from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. It's called the Supportive Services for Veteran Families Grant. And they usually want us to have at least 3 to 5 letters of recommendation every year when we apply. So it's just a renewal to, we've had at Homeward Bound, I'm not exactly sure how many years we've had the
I think
grant.
since 2014.
It's been a long time, yeah. And so every year we have to apply for a renewal, and they usually require some letters of support.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we get a breakdown anywhere about how many male and female veterans we served?
I didn't put it in this form, but I could provide that. We do HMIS sharing, and we do have kind of between HMIS and different data that we track internally as a team. We can get numbers like that to you for sure.
I just don't get, what I get a lot of out here is that we don't serve that many female veterans.
Interesting.
So, and I would love to see that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I definitely would say in my experience that I would see less female veterans than male veterans. But I absolutely agree with you that I'd like to see that change. And I've learned of some resources in the community like Aurora House
Yes.
that could be helpful in doing something like that, increasing those numbers.
Those ladies are great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, any other discussion? All right, do I have a motion to approve the letter of support for Homeward Bound?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Thank you. We'll just do a roll call vote. Lance Crawford, yes. David Bartholomew? Yes. Jamie Benshoff?
Yes.
Elvia Diaz?
Yes.
Rick Freeman?
Yes.
Lacey Hoyle?
Yes.
Marcus Laws?
Yes.
Tim McElroy?
Yes.
And Joelle Steininger?
Yes.
Okay, it's been approved.
All right, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is a report from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office on their downtown initiative. Deputy Freeborn, good to see you.
Good morning, how are y'all doing? I'm Brian Freeborn. I'm a sergeant with support operations at the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. Primarily work with crisis intervention or negotiation team and have been building our co-responder program. Roughly 2 years ago, we met with the community paramedics, the Sheriff's Office did, to look at opportunities to partner with them on various calls for service. At the time, their capacity and what they were working on and what our capacity at the time didn't really make sense for a partnership. Fast forward to last spring, we had more direction and better numbers in terms of what we wanted to look at in terms of a partnership. And so We laid out the types of calls for service that we would do for a co-response with the community paramedics. For those of y'all who are not familiar with the community paramedics, they do various homeless outreach, they do post-overdose response and wound care, stuff like that. They also have licensed clinicians that work with them. So when we looked at what their capacity was and how we best could serve each other and the community, we identified behavioral health and substance use calls that were non-criminal in nature. We, at the sheriff's office, we have to respond to calls that come in through 911. Oftentimes they come in as a mental subject. That's how it's dispatched to us, or suicidal subject. And typically we send out a deputy, multiple deputies to a call like that. At the sheriff's office, we send our staff through crisis intervention team training, which is a 40-hour block of training that gives people exposure to folks, different types of mental illnesses and behavioral health issues, along with what kind of a broad overview of what services are available in our community. APD also runs their staff through there. Currently, we're at about 85% of our staff have been through CIT training. APD's numbers are probably a lot higher. They typically run all of their new staff through that program prior to being issued a taser. So their numbers are a little bit better than ours. And the idea is that we are responding in a way that's trauma-informed to folks that are having an acute crisis situation. So over the summer, we had 2 deputies that participated in our pilot program. They responded together along with a coordinated response with the community paramedics. So based on the call for service, they would coordinate with them. Oftentimes a paramedic, sometimes a clinician would show up and resolve the acute crisis and try and provide that person with the best opportunity, or whether it's sending them to the behavioral crisis center, to the hospital, or just linkage to care. Not everybody has to go somewhere. Sometimes they just need to be assisted in stabilization where they're at. So we did that over the summer. We had roughly 200 calls for service, no arrests, and no use of force incidents. We had several significant cases where folks received significant linkage to care, where otherwise a traditional response would have either just taken them to the hospital, they would have received care and then been back on the street, or they would have been taken into custody for parole violations. So when the program was over, we were utilizing school resource officers for the pilot program, and school went back into session. We were hoping to continue the program into just like make it a permanent response. However, staffing levels are what they are. Law enforcement, the sheriff's office is not immune to what's facing law enforcement agencies across America in terms of a shortage of staff. So we had put the program on pause. Then we thought that we were going to be able to relaunch it again in the fall with multiple deputies. And what we ended up doing is we did relaunch, and currently I respond to calls for service as needed. If I'm not tied up with meetings or administrative duties, I'll respond to calls. Patrol will oftentimes call me and say, hey, this is what we have, can you come out with us? So I do, I'm probably responding to 20 calls a week currently, where we're deferring people from the emergency room, oftentimes either to the BHCC or linking them to care, outpatient care. We currently have access to the clinicians that work with the community paramedics. Oftentimes, they'll respond with us on the call, trying to work in to the rotation of having them in the car with us, responding in real time. That's where we see the best response. A couple of weeks ago, as I was coming on duty early in the morning, one of the Code Purple shelters had a female subject that was stating that she was having suicidal ideation. That prompted a response from the sheriff's office, and so they would send multiple deputies along with EMS. So we get there, so I get there, we see that she's not actively violent, she's just having thoughts. So we were able to clear the deputies, put them back in service. She didn't trust law enforcement. She didn't have a history of positive interactions. Once I explained who I was, what I do, who I partner with, that seemed to bridge that gap. Was able to get the clinician to meet me there along with the community paramedics, the ambulance that arrived. It was clear that she didn't need to go to the hospital. So we were able to put the ambulance back in service because either I can transport or community paramedics can transport. So ultimately, our clinician, she was able to build rapport, identify appropriate action item or action plan for her, and we were able to take her to where she needed to go. She spent a couple weeks there. She then as they were en route, they identified, a care plan for her after she was stabilized. She also needed to do some detox work, and so she's there. She had open warrants for failure to appear. We were able to get her court dates adjusted, so she no longer had that order for arrest. So we were able to stabilize her situation in more ways than one by having that concentrated effort in response. So that's what we do. Our goal is in the next 30 days, we should have a second deputy that's full-time responding to calls for service. That'll allow us to have that two deputy response Monday through Friday during normal business hours. And then as we get additional staffing, we'll gear up to having a 7-day-a-week team. We're working on trying to acquire funding for those embedded clinicians to have with our deputies full-time, having behavioral health professionals with us. And then ultimately, we will have 24/7 coverage, but it's probably going to take us 2 or 3 years to get there. Any questions on the co-responder program before I give y'all a brief update on downtown? Go ahead.
I bring lived experience. I was homeless. As a result, I have a severe mental illness and a history of substance abuse. And so I love the NAMI CIT training, and I have participated in that. So I'm so glad to hear you're doing that program. One question regarding the woman that you shared the story about in Code Purple. Why wasn't mobile crisis called? It seems like that would be the level of addressing it rather than you responding.
So that's a great question. And, there's mobile crisis there's folks and service providers in our community that are very familiar with mobile crisis and work well with mobile crisis. Mobile crisis works well for them. Sometimes a person can present as an acute crisis where they need an immediate response, and so 911 gets called. And if 911 gets called, mobile crisis is not getting called. We're getting called. And so if we get there, in our experience, law enforcement's experience with mobile crisis is that the amount of time it takes for them to arrive on scene, we don't really have that time. So we're looking to identify a faster way to provide an appropriate care for service for that person.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Several questions.
Okay.
First of all, with your training for your mental health, how does it make you guys feel? I know that for the training that I have, just dealing with officers in general, having to use Narcan with someone, having an officer say to me, "How many times can you use Narcan?" And my answer was, "Is he alive? Yes, keep using it till help arrives," right? And it's so when we get trained, we're not in heightened mode ourselves, right? So we're like, so this, one, just to say that that training just gives you just that ability to not be in flight or flight yourself, to go home and just to be able to continue to be relaxed. So I think I can answer that and just say it just helps you do this job better, right? So I think I've answered that kind of sort of.
Yeah, well, so, we, at the sheriff's office, we have implemented a step pay program that's incentivized by specialized training. A lot of that is based in 21st century policing and communication. We also have embedded clinicians at the sheriff's office, and our staff have access to responder support service for ongoing counseling to help them work through issues that they have. So our community, our law enforcement community, APD has access to that service as well. And, I will tell you that, there's a large number of law enforcement and first responders that are utilizing ongoing counseling just to maintain, a positive state of mind while we do this job.
For sure.
Yeah.
So other cities have names for their programs. Is there a specific name for the program, or do you have a?
We don't have anything cool yet. There's a lot of acronyms out there, and we've looked at a lot of programs. We went up to Cincinnati back in the fall. A co-response model isn't new or revolutionary. It's been happening for a long time, and we're probably the last progressive city and county to implement a co-response program. And so we just say we're co-responders. Asheville Fire, they have their community responders. The county EMS, they have their community paramedics. We're just trying to build what works for Buncombe County and for Asheville. So,
Next question.
yeah.
So did I hear correctly that your preferred method is, and what everybody else out there likes, is your in-car response, where the medic is riding along with you?
Well, not the medic so much
Behavioral health,
as
or?
having the behavioral health professional in the car with us. That's my preferred. Having done roughly 100 calls for service in this program, where I see the magic work is when I have the clinician or the behavioral health specialist with me. Once we're able to identify that this is not a violent encounter, I'm really good at what I do. I'm really good at talking with folks that are going through an acute crisis. However, there comes a point where I'm not necessarily the right person just because of this, right?
Exactly.
And so being able to pull them in and say, hey, this is my friend here. She is a licensed clinician. She's going to talk to you, and she's really awesome. Boom. Vice versa, when I've been called to a scene by the community paramedics or the clinician, they say, hey, this is Sergeant Freeborn. We really like him. We trust him. We believe in him. And then that opens the door as well.
So next question, sorry. So prior to the fall, you had this program and it was running, and then everything changed. That initial program, rather than what is going on now, did you like that better?
Well, we liked that we had 2 dedicated deputies to the program. We were really testing, we didn't really know what we were getting into, and we wanted to test out different models, different ways of approach. And what we have identified now, we feel very clear on what the pathway is. We want to have that initial response to calls for service, that's law enforcement and the behavioral health specialist. And then we also want to, so if you think of it as you have the initial call, which is the acute crisis, right? And then there's going to be, you've got the behavioral health specialist that's sort of taking over at some point with that. The next thing to like sort of complete the circle is having some type of navigator that's going to help them and do some initial case follow-up where we're bridging that gap. Because sometimes, so for the sheriff's office, most of the calls for service are housed individuals. They have jobs, they have insurance, they just may not have a team, like a care team. Or they may have a care team and that care team no longer is serving them, right? Or, and we're getting repeat calls for service to that location, or it's a first-time call, like they've never had an issue. And so we want to make sure that they're getting some type of follow-up so that we're not having to go back out as law enforcement, because our goals are to reduce overdoses, reduce IVCs, involuntary commitments, reduce overall behavioral health calls for service, and reduce jail bookings based on behavioral health calls for service.
And in the reduction of IECs, which is why we don't necessarily call, what is it?
CIT.
Or mobile crisis.
Right, for mobile crisis, which is why, because sometimes that takes up to 3 hours for because they are so busy. We don't necessarily call them because.
They have a 2-hour response time,
Right.
and they're just as understaffed as everybody else.
And that's usually when we're trying to get somebody into a bed for detox.
Yeah.
Can you
Thank you.
request a CIT trained officer to respond if you call 911?
You can, and you can also request to have a co-response team as well. Okay. Downtown. So the sheriff's office, back in the summer, we did 30, 60 days of a downtown initiative where we put foot patrols in the central business district during evening hours on the weekends. So it's Friday, Saturday night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. High visibility, making sure that folks felt safe and they saw us out on the street. It went really well. Over the last year, downtown businesses have continued to request that presence, feeling like they need to see additional law enforcement presence downtown. So the sheriff asked the county commissioners for funding to pay secondary pay for our deputies to go back into doing that foot patrols downtown on Friday and Saturday evenings. And our goal was to bring Asheville Police on board as a partner with that, since it's their jurisdiction mainly, and we wanted to continue that partnership with them. So we started it off. We did a couple weeks on our own, and finally this last week we were able to solidify that partnership with APD, and so we will extend our hours. Will be from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. Fridays and Saturdays, high visibility. Foot patrols will also do foot patrols. We'll have marked vehicles, and we'll have our gym car, which is an electric vehicle. Captain Brown, do you want to add anything?
I think from our standpoint, we're looking forward to this partnership and what this is going to mean to the business community, the folks that live downtown and work and recreate. I think we see it as a huge positive. And as you mentioned, the hours are extended from 7 to 3. We'll have a police officer paired with a deputy walking So I just think it's going to have a lot of benefits to the downtown community.
Is the goal, I know earlier in the fall, APD was doing sort of a few sweeps and arresting a number of people for misdemeanor violations, in addition to more serious charges. Is the goal of this downtown initiative to do that, or is it more to just provide a police presence and possibly a co-response approach to issues that come up?
Yeah, so I don't want to get ahead of Sergeant Freeborn, but this partnership is going to be blended in terms of enforcement. It will be focused on resource providing, and I think it's going to be situational to what deputies and officers encounter while they're conducting their foot patrols. I don't expect it to look like targeted operations that have taken place in the past, but I do expect that there, at some point in time, between the beginning and whenever the end may be, there will be arrests made. But, in that conversation, the opportunity to provide resources and kind of think out of the box and expand this response model that Sergeant Freeborn has described, this is going to be a primary opportunity for that to take place downtown.
That sounds positive. I would just like to say that, in the process of trying to house people and end homelessness for them, it is not particularly helpful for them to be in jail without their belongings, or for them to have a long list of pending charges. So if we're working together as a community, arrests are not a solution to homelessness. Arrests have to happen if there's a dangerous situation and there's a risk of violence or something like that. I understand that. But arrests are not a solution to homelessness.
Yeah, Mr. Nash. So for the sheriff's office and, in our conversations with APD, we have not been focused on an enforcement focused response in our patrols downtown. It is, we know that business owners and the general public want to see uniformed officers and deputies downtown and know that they are there in case something happens. When we have been operating, last summer when we were downtown, we were not arresting people. I don't believe we had a single arrest during that period of time. And since we started the program up, I think I'm the only deputy that initiated an arrest, and that was somebody it was a DWI. So, we will encounter folks that are unhoused. We are going to encounter folks that are having what appears as a behavioral health issue, and our staff is trained appropriately to respond to that. And they've been informed that, we want them to first try and provide care unless it's something that is criminal in nature.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. Apologies, I knew we were running behind. I had someone approach me who said to me, Elvia, I know what the business owners can do to help us. At night, they can put buckets out for us to poop in. And I went, yeah. I went, no, I want to provide a bathroom for you. There's one right next to the police station that's supposed to be open. We fought really hard to have it, and it's not open. He said, no, it's okay. They can just put buckets out. We'll be okay. That's asking for less and less each day. Mm-hmm. So I really need that bathroom open. If the community paramedics can have a key, somebody has to open that bathroom. Need a bathroom open.
I don't think the sheriff's office has the key to the bathroom.
No,
there are others here who-
we're hearing each other. We're all in the same room, right? But it's a bit of a benefit so that the business owners don't complain when they have to come out, because he doesn't want them to have to clean up what he's doing. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but where is he going to go? Because that's an arrestable, like I know of other people that have had these arrests. And this is one
Well,
of those.
in an ideal world, we would have beds for everybody.
Absolutely,
Sure.
that part. But I just wanted to share that story because it's really important to somebody that says, I don't want to be doing what I'm doing. I don't want the business owner to be upset with me.
Yeah.
Right? He's trying to to have a solution. That's the only one he has because he doesn't have a home. That's deep. So it's not, I'm not blaming, but I'm sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate you. And thanks, the co-response approach is a very good approach. And we appreciate the partnership
Thanks.
from both agencies. Okay. Continuum of care transition updates.
Well, good morning again, everyone. Just want to give you an update on the continuum of care transition. It's really exciting what's happening. The continuum of care launch is near. It's actually happening this month. We've had a great response, and I can't give you updates without first recognizing the nominating and membership committee and the work and effort they've put in for a long time to get this off the ground. So it's a group of really passionate folks who have worked together with a common goal, and we're almost there. And of course, the support we've gotten from city staff, Emily and Sydney, has been phenomenal. We couldn't have gotten this far without them. So we've had a great response to interest for being a member of the COC. We've had 146 individuals fill out a form to become a member and 39 organizations, and that is a phenomenal start to this, and it actually hasn't even started yet. So I think we're off to a great start, to use that word again. We have new member orientations coming up this month, so everyone who filled out one of those forms has been notified of that membership orientation. So we have 4 options this month, and so everyone will be oriented before our first membership meeting later on in the month, which, speaking of that, is on February 29th. So on February 29th, we will have our first official new COC meeting, which is really exciting. And the main purpose of that meeting will be to vote on the charter and to begin the board process. So really excited about that. And speaking of that charter, each person, each individual and organization who filled out a form to become a member was given an opportunity to give feedback on that charter. So they were given a copy of the charter and a way to communicate their feedback. We got around 60 points of feedback, and the nominating and membership committee went through all of those and made revisions where necessary. And we have come to the point where we have a final draft charter. Something that we're really proud of, we think is really, really thorough, something that's been worked on for the past year. We've gotten technical assistance from HUD throughout the process and feel really, really good about this being our charter to create the COC. Our second anticipated meeting will be in March, and that will be to elect a board for the COC. So February, the first meeting, we'll vote on the charter, and then in March will be the plan to elect a new board. So speaking of that charter, everyone was given the copy of the final draft of the charter, and I want to make a recommendation, I guess a motion to HIAC to endorse that charter.
Second.
Any questions? I do have one question, and can you sort of describe what the process is, not the process, but what efforts are identified in the new charter to maintain some level of continuity from what the work we've been doing to the new board?
Yeah, Emily, do you want to speak to that? The continuity between HIAC and the new board.
I'm sorry, can you say the question again?
What aspects of the new governance charter will ensure that there is a level of continuity between the work of this board and the new board?
Well, I think what the charter does is really codifies and clarifies the work of the continuum of care that this board has been holding, but that hasn't ever been on paper in the way that it is now in this new charter, so that it can be very clear to the community, very transparent, so that folks can understand how all of these pieces fit together, where they fit into this landscape, including all of the folks who are on this board. My anticipation is that in the new continuum of care structure, a lot of the work that this committee has done will map onto some of the committees that are established in the charter that will do really a lot of the detailed work that you all have done, and then make those recommendations to the board. I haven't gone back to look, but I certainly hope all of you have become members at this point. If not, we will follow up. And so absolutely would encourage folks who have been HIAC members to participate in the new structure and bring that expertise to bear.
Okay. Do we have a motion or any other questions? Motion to endorse this new charter?
I motioned. and
Oh, you made the
Rick
motion's
seconded.
been made, I'm sorry. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
David, if I might. now
Any
that you're-
opposed?
Now that the official business is done, I know that there are some folks here that I've met in the community, that we were talking about the importance of the COC belonging to the community and the responsibility and the shared work of our community instead of it being under the city umbrella. And that's so important to making this shared responsibility and shared success. So it's not just about the people at this table signing up to join in this work, but the people in our community and our neighborhoods, the people experiencing homelessness. We need each other through this. And so if you're watching this meeting at home or you're in the audience, you're also invited to please apply and participate with us.
Yes, definitely apply, participate as a member. The members will elect the governing board and will have the opportunity to participate on committees.
I want to clarify, thank you so much, Lance, for all of your work on this. Lance has really done a tremendous job in chairing this committee. I just want to clarify, mostly for folks who might be listening, that the vote that you all just took was to endorse the charter as the current Continuum of Care Board. So not to approve the charter, since approval rests with the new Continuum of Care membership body. But as our current Continuum of Care Board, very important to have your endorsement to just confirm that this is an appropriate path forward.
Okay, anything else on that? Nikki, can we push you to the end? Okay. Committee updates, I don't think we need another update from nominations and membership. And I don't believe we have any updates from coordinated entry or funding allocations, correct? But we do have an update from the shelter team, and Lacey is going to give that.
Yes. Well, good morning, everyone. So I am excited today to share an in-depth update on the work that's been happening to coordinate a long-term response to the National Alliance recommendation for increased shelter capacity. As you all know, last year HIAC established a work group to address this particular recommendation, and as a result of their good work, we have some increased capacity that is currently funded and operational until the end of this year. Right now, we're also doing ongoing work to figure out how to address the recommendation in the long term, and that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. Closer to me, got it. All right, so I wanted to just start off this morning by sharing the recommendation from the National Alliance in its entirety, so I'm going to read that here for us today. The recommendation was to increase crisis response capacity to meet 30% of the immediate problem solving and shelter needs of unsheltered homelessness. They go on to say we should implement newly funded effective shelter bed capacity by 30%, identify non-congregate sites which would significantly improve the number of people accepting shelter placement, refer to shelter inventory to see the list of current shelter beds, and this should all happen in conjunction with retooling existing shelter options to be effective. So I just want to point out here that the National Alliance placed a particular emphasis on the need for increased shelter capacity to be effective, and they further specify that effective shelter should embrace a housing first approach, implement diversion when it's safe and appropriate to do so, and offer immediate and low barrier access to anyone who's facing a housing crisis. So as you all know in this room, we have several shelters currently operating in our community, all of whom are doing really great work to safely shelter folks and connect them with programs and services. The National Alliance is asking us here to expand upon that work and those offerings and to ensure that we're able to offer a low barrier option as well so that anyone in our community who needs shelter can access that. And so that is what the shelter work group and now the team of folks that are working on the long-term response have been aiming to do. So I wanted to just share with you the group of folks that's currently working on this effort. Some of these folks were members of the shelter work group, including Commissioner Beach Ferrara and Mayor Manheimer. We also have county and city management and county and city staff and a couple of members of HIAC who are working on this all together. Next slide, please. So far, county staff has led the first phase of the planning process for development of this additional low barrier capacity. And I just wanted to share a little bit about the process that we've undertaken thus far. So what we did first was take a look at existing resources. We created a resource database, and that database will actually soon be available on the county's community development homelessness webpage. But for us, it was really helpful in understanding what services are already out there, as well as where they're located. So that's helpful because we were able to create maps of resources in the area, which helped the team to think about where our unhoused neighbors are currently spending the most time and what might be needed in terms of location for a permanent shelter. I'm going to talk about all of these steps a little bit more specifically later on in the presentation. We also spent a good bit of time reviewing service models around the country and looking at data to help the shelter team make decisions on what we believe our capacity needs may be now and in the future. And once we had an idea of what services we wanted to see offered and what we think our capacity might be, we started to think about space planning. And to do that, we had some further conversation with some of the shelter models we had already interviewed, did some other research, and with that information, we were able to get an idea not only how much space we think we might need, but to also start thinking about how the space should be laid out in order to serve the needs of our community. And this work also helped us come up with a list of criteria that will help us when we're selecting a site for the location of the shelter, which is work that is in progress now. At this point, the planning process was not intended to and did not consider operational costs. That is a later phase of larger shelter project and planning that will be happening in the future. As we worked through the planning process, we conducted polling activities of the members of the shelter team, and we made decisions by consensus. The information that I'm going to be sharing with you all in the next couple of slides was thought through collaboratively with careful consideration to ensure that all of the entities that were represented equally and fairly in decision making. And I'm going at a clip here, but if any of you have any questions, please feel free to stop me at any point, okay? So I just wanted to show you one of the maps that we looked at. This is only one of a few that we looked at. So this is just a map of existing resources that we looked at to consider the needs. As you can see, and probably already know, many of our resources are currently located in or near downtown. And this is where unhoused folks in our community are spending a lot of time. So this helps us to understand that wherever a shelter is located, it needs to be able to be easily accessed by public transportation or pedestrian infrastructure. And it's going to need to be relatively simple for individuals to get both to the shelter and also to where else they might need to go to access services. Next slide, please. When we considered capacity needs, we spent some time reviewing existing data, most notably the PIT counts from 2007 to 2023. We looked at sheltered versus unsheltered populations for those years. We looked at how many people in each of those categories were individuals versus households. And we looked also at the number of beds available each year versus the sheltered and unsheltered populations. And then we worked with the county's strategy and innovations team to use that data to make some baseline projections for the overall unhoused population in the coming years, as well as for the sheltered and unsheltered populations respectively. So I wanted to just share one little bit of data today on the number of available beds versus the sheltered and unsheltered count for each year. So just for clarification, the blue is sheltered unhoused individuals, the green is unsheltered unhoused, and that orange line is how many beds are available. So as you can see, there were a few years recently when the number of beds was actually higher than the number of unsheltered people. Thanks to some supplemental questions that the city added into the PIT count last year, and I think it was also in this year's survey as well, we do know at least some of the reasons why some people experiencing homelessness in our community are not accessing beds even when they're available. Last year's responses indicated that some individuals felt that existing shelters have too many restrictive rules, that they feel unsafe, that there may be too many people in a congregate setting, and that's causing a lot of anxiety, that there are barriers to entry like ID requirements, pets may not be allowed, or that it feels institutional to them. Oftentimes the shelters are full. So these individuals that are not accessing beds even when they're available in our community, these are folks that we're interested in serving here, along with the rest of the unhoused community as well. You know, the goal is to meet the National Alliance recommendation to reduce unsheltered homelessness by 50% within the next 2 years. Yeah.
Sometimes the reason people are unsheltered is because they lose their bed in a shelter that they have been in.
Right.
So when you reference restrictive rules, I think it's an important point that somebody may have gone into a shelter, sought help, and then for whatever reasons lost their bed.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Jamie. So we can go to the next slide. I also just wanted to share a little bit about our projections. So as I mentioned before, we worked with the county's strategy and innovations team to use the PIT count data to make some very preliminary projections about what we could see in the coming years. So what I'm sharing here is the projection for the unsheltered, unhoused population. It's projected to grow moderately by 3% in the coming years, with a projection of 212 unhoused, unsheltered individuals by 2030. That number could very well be different. This is just a baseline projection using a narrow data set, so just want to share that. Next slide. So just to summarize a little bit when it comes to capacity needs, and I will share in just a moment what we think our capacity needs may be in terms of how many folks we want to serve with this effort. In 2023, the number of open beds exceeded the number of unsheltered persons in our community. The National Alliance offers a clear 95-bed recommendation, but they also reference increasing shelter bed capacity by 30%. That's a little bit ambiguous, and it results in a range of beds recommended between 87 and 168 based on the 2022 PIT count, and whether or not we include or exclude transitional housing beds from that calculation. The National Alliance also recommends, again, that we reduce unsheltered homelessness by 50%. And if we look at the 2022 PIT count, that would mean that there would still be around 116 people unsheltered even if we achieved that goal. And HIAC did adopt this goal for the 2-year window, which would carry us through the end of calendar year 2025. So keeping in mind all of that, if we were to make no changes to the system or the number of beds offered, the unsheltered population, like I said, is projected to grow to 212 by 2030. All right, so once we kind of understood capacity, we were able to turn our attention to selecting model components. To do this, we spent a little bit of time reviewing best practices, and I'll just briefly go over them here. So the National Alliance best practices for emergency shelter are that it should offer immediate and low barrier access, and that it should embrace a housing first approach. HUD's best practices advise avoiding charging fees, allowing people to enter who are intoxicated, and eliminating additional references or unnecessary requirements in order to have a bed. We also spent some time looking at different models for low barrier shelter from across the country. Some of these models, which you'll see listed here, were recommended to the shelter work group by the National Alliance. Others were identified as models of interest by members of the shelter team. Either the shelter work group or a team of folks participating in this larger effort interviewed all of these models using the same questions, hoping to just get an understanding of what services they're offering and what their operations look like and how low barrier is working for them. Then we spent some time comparing and contrasting the different models. We looked at access considerations, shelter composition, what kinds of beds they have in their shelters, and what supportive services were offered, and also how they were offered in each shelter. Next slide. And so here's what we've come up with that we like and would recommend for our community so far. We believe that we should offer 100 non-congregate beds. So that's beds where an individual or household has a space of their own. We also think we need to offer around 50 congregate beds. We'd like to see at this facility case management services, behavioral health services, medical care services, substance use treatment, housing placement support, employment support. None of that would be mandatory in order to receive a bed. We would like for it to be available on site for folks to access if they want to. We also want day shelter space to be located in this facility. And we also we think it would be a good idea to provide meals to the population staying there. As far as the operating policies, we're recommending that this facility be open 24/7, that pets be allowed, that there be operations sufficient to serve families safely, and that we offer some sort of transportation assistance. Questions on those so far? So I just want to say before I talk about square footage too, that we've also started talking with some community partners. We wanted to get perspective on services that might be useful for the population in that particular setting based on what they're seeing with folks they're already working with. And we're also just starting to gauge interest in partnership for service provision at this facility. That dialogue is ongoing and no decisions have been made about anything at this point. You have a question?
Kind of, sort of, maybe it segues into design. I had to make myself indisposed. With the services being provided, in-house, such as meals, I'm just trying to think of a way to put this. Design and layout, is there one already set or in place, or is this still an idea?
It's still an idea. Yeah, we're not at that point in the planning process yet. But we could not get to a point of starting to plan the space in that way until we know for sure what services we recommend, what services you all think we definitely need to include.
So once, let's just say we say that any service will be provided. Is there a set structure along with that service? Meaning, can the service be designed? Are we designing services, or are we just going, oh, well, this one's great, we're just going to add that?
I don't think that the shelter team is designing the services necessarily. It's more about identifying what services we'd like to see on site and then collaborating with community partners providing the services to figure out what will work in that space.
So my suggestion is to design the service as well. I think we fall short of plugging in a service and going, this is going to work. There's a lot of services that we already use that are in place that don't work.
Okay.
And I see opportunity to design services that specifically work for us.
So what I was going to add is that I think this is one of the key topics in the next phase.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've touched people who provide services, and they have given us some feedback that helps us build everything that Lacey and the team has done. But moving forward, operational costs, kind of human beings, what's permanently in the building, what comes and goes day in, day out, there's a boatload of work to be done. And we just need to make sure we have the right people in the next phase of the team to challenge things like this so that we get the best possible path forward.
So while the building is being built, designed, all the other designers, is now time to design what we need. Every other building might have the same designer, but I see a vision of this doesn't work, or this is tried and true, these are all the statistics that I see, and now here's the way I want it designed.
Okay, duly noted.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so just continuing on, once we've made some decisions about a service model, we were able to start considering how much space we think we might need. Can you go back to the last slide? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Lacey, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
It looks like you're kind of looking at centralizing this proposed shelter. Any of the models that you looked at, were they like non-centralized where, it was more like neighborhood, especially for the non-congregate?
There were a couple of facilities that had like congregate shelter in one space and then non-congregate in one or two other sites, yeah.
Okay.
So, and a little bit further down in the presentation, I'm going to talk about site selection criteria that we've come up with. So I'll just briefly share, we think a single site would really be ideal, but we're not opposed to multiple sites if that seems like it's what would work best with all of the needs for the project.
Okay.
Could I add something?
Sure.
We did talk about how there might need to be separate entrances and separate ways for people to get to their shelter part, and that would be the way a single site would accomplish some of the objectives of disparate sites.
I would see that, yeah.
So that's going to be complicated, I think.
Yeah, I
And
see.
goes back to the design, it's just
Absolutely.
how you have a common area feel that works well for multiple populations. I think that it's something we really need to walk through in the next phase.
I would also say that having something off-site for someone who has seen the same scenery 24/7 is an opportunity to see a different perspective. You don't want to be stuck in the same facility where everything is your world.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous place to be.
Sure.
You need to have a different perspective.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone would be stuck there either. I do
No,
want to
but
just say that.
Yeah, but when I say it in that way, I mean, you don't have to. It is an opportunity to say, here's where you're going, rather than,
Sure.
I can't. Sometimes people can't, and you don't know that they can't.
Sure,
It's,
Yeah.
right? So
absolutely.
mental health breaks down, and you don't know it. It is an opportunity to be under a different tree.
Sure, yeah. So once we made some decisions about the service model, we started to think about how much space we think we might need in order to accommodate all of these services. We looked at a feasibility study from Indianapolis. They conducted a planning exercise for a low barrier shelter with co-located services, kind of similar to what we're looking at doing. We also had some further conversation with one of the models that we had previously looked at, Oak City Cares, which is a day shelter in the Raleigh-Durham area. We wanted just more information about how their space is laid out, how much space they have and think that they need for their services while we were trying to think about that particular service. And so here at the end of all of that and at the end of discussion, here's kind of what we came up with. In total, we're looking at a building that's around 50,000 square feet to accommodate all of the beds and all of the shelter space. Questions on the square footage so far? All right, next slide. Thank you. With our square footage needs in mind and with the services and populations that we want to serve in mind, we also were able to develop as a team a list of site selection criteria. You can see that here. So we think the building should be around 50,000 square foot. We'd really like to see a single building with multiple entrance options, including a mixed array of interior spaces with a focus on 100 or more smaller rooms as ideal. Of course, ADA accessibility is very important. We will consider a vacant lot, but I think due to the need for more immediate response, an existing building would be preferred. Single site is ideal, but 2 or more proximate sites would be considered. Next slide, please. We think it should be within city limits on an existing transit route with high frequency, in an area with sidewalk or pedestrian infrastructure, in an area that hopefully already has appropriate zoning, proximate to both faith-based institutions that are offering supportive services as well as other existing homelessness-related services. So this is the criteria that we developed as a team that we are using to evaluate potential sites, and that work is ongoing right now. In terms of next steps, this discussion and your consideration is the next step. We're hoping for your endorsement of the recommendations that we've made here today. That your endorsement sets parameters for us so that we can start to build out information on operational costs. And just to kind of give an example of that, if, for example, you all felt that we should not include meals as a service offered, that would change the layout of the space, it would change the amount of money and how the services are designed. So we wanted to bring all of this to you all first, get your endorsement, then we would like to go to commissioners and to city council to provide this update as well, get feedback from them, and then county and city staff can continue to work to identify potential sites and also begin to investigate the potential operating costs and funding sources. And we would plan to share that information for review when it's appropriate to do so with the shelter team, and then of course with HIAC as well. So with that, I just want to open it up for any further discussion or additional questions.
In terms of the behavioral health services that you're looking for, was there a evaluation of kind of what capacity we have already, how we'll access that, and not create like a parallel service over here providing mental health and SUD at this facility that might already be in the community?
Yeah, that's been part of my conversations with partners that we've talked with so far. And I don't really have a specific answer other than to say we don't want to really duplicate services. Yeah. We want to have services at this facility that really work for the folks utilizing this facility, and it may be similar but not exactly the same. And that I think that's work that's ongoing with the partners that may end up agreeing to participate in this.
One thing that we're learning is some services, for example, the harms reduction or the Narcan, they have a mobile unit that can come and respond, be there regularly, so they don't have to be one-stop shop like we're describing.
Questions, others?
I have a consideration, not necessarily a question, because I'm not a member of the HIAC. As your liaison, I'm thinking of the folks in neighborhoods that have been approaching me, concerned about the projections and our goals to reduce homelessness. Specifically hearing from families and neighbors about youth that are sleeping on couches and floors. But when we look at the rising cost of housing, it was noted that the projections for growth are modest or moderate, but those households might be bigger or multi-generational. So that could impact our young folks and also elders. So it might look like, let's say there's 5 households that are considered, but those 5 households might not be 5 people. They might reflect 10 people or 20 people. So are we looking at our McKinney-Vento numbers and anticipating folks exiting foster care in those projections?
That's not something that we've looked at specifically at this point, but we can definitely take a look at it, take it
one of
into
the reasons that-
consideration.
Thank you. It seemed like what they were suggesting is that we might need more spaces for intact families.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Questions?
There's a question in the back.
I do want to open up questions from the audience in just a minute. but-
I just have one quick question or thought. When providing meals, so, for example, Compass Point Village doesn't necessarily provide a meal. They offer food, yes? Is that correct?
Compass Point Village provides a meal. It's a buffet-style meal that people come and pick up a plate. But it's not currently cooked at Compass Point Village, if that's your question.
So that's kind of the question. What kind of meal would you be providing? Does it take the right away from somebody else to provide their own food? Yeah. And so would you be providing a kitchen, like a kitchen sort of as in some apartment buildings have a kitchen facility, a banquet facility, a hall for events or family events or group events in the building for camaraderie, et cetera, community space. The terminology is really important as opposed to.
Good questions to be
Yeah.
considered.
Yeah, I think that's the right answer here. Good questions to be considered.
You don't have to answer, just for thought.
It hasn't been, that level of specificity hasn't been decided at this point.
So we are running short on time. We have 2 options in terms of getting further input from the broader group here. One is to allow you to ask questions now, or the other is to take careful notes during public comment if people have suggestions about this plan. Does the committee have a preference?
I'd prefer to hear the questions now, as it might impact.
How many questions do we have in the audience right now? Can you raise your hand again? Or comments? 3? Okay, let's go ahead. Ladies first.
It'd be helpful if you all would come up and speak into the microphone since we're
Yeah,
live
do
streaming.
come up
That
and
way
speak
it'll-
into the
it'll be
microphone.
caught.
And you can adjust the microphone to suit yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna with Counterflow and Safe Shelter. I was just wondering, how, if you were to accommodate the shelter at a single site and with multiple entrances, I guess we'd have to have kind of areas that were just access. I'm just wondering about how everything can coexist with sex offenders and families and, low barrier, but then also,
So what we saw with some of the other models that we reviewed that were single site was that there were separate entrances for families versus the general population, and also that some areas of the facility are only accessible by key card entry with staff. So maybe a family could come in and they would go into a certain section that would only be accessible to families who are with staff accompanying them.
So you'd have
into
to
that
lock
area.
off certain areas. and
Yes,
You'd have a
yeah.
very specific control of flow.
That's right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kikuye Christian. Tell us your name before you.
Hey, I'm Kinkoya, and I was wondering if you might, I was suggesting an auditorium for some of the newer shelters.
Okay.
I know at the Veterans Quarters, we always had a problem with overflow, but you could also use it for meetings and fundraisers and whatnot.
Right, yeah, thank you for that suggestion, yeah.
I'm Christian Chambers, Director of Safe Shelter. I didn't know you were here, Hannah. Shout out. I was just wondering, I saw when you had put the names up of everybody involved. And of course, I respect all the work and everything. Just is there any number of people, I know there's some lived experience, but is there any number of people that have worked kind of boots on the ground and are still doing that to see like the changes in homelessness, how it affects people working with people that are experiencing homelessness, and also consider I know we're housing first, but working in coordinated entry myself for a number of years, it has proven that in this community, housing first is about a 50-50 shot, if I'm gonna be honest. So I don't hear a lot of people talking about that, but it could use a little tweaking. And we have found at Safe Shelter too, with more of a, wraparound service approach, but kind of preparing people for housing, the success rate is, 100%. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Sure.
my question about, will there be opportunity to add people with different experience to that?
Yeah, well, so I will say that in terms of seeking perspective from folks who are currently providing services, I think the dialogue with partners that we've already had is helping to serve that purpose. And also, if you'll recall, I spoke at the system leaders meeting and am planning to continue to do that regularly to keep getting perspective and feedback from you all. I felt like that conversation was extraordinarily helpful. I don't think at this point that we would have a regular member of the team that would be someone who's currently working. And that's because we may end up later on down the line requesting partnership. And it's kind of weird to have some folks in the room who are already providing services and not everyone in the room who's already providing services for that.
That makes sense. Just to follow up with it, I know there's a physician with the city getting ready to be contracted called the community champion, which would be sort of a liaison between the community and the city. Would that be, that's kind of a suggestion, like, again, because I do think it's very important to have those boots on the ground people, or at least their ideas and opinions really taken into consideration.
Absolutely. I don't know anything about that position, but I'll be excited to hear more about it.
You'll see my name in there. Okay.
Any other questions or comments from the?
Hi, my name's Abby. I had a question for you about your plan with the shelter. What is your approach to holistic reintegration for a homeless person that has no job and might be addicted? And like, what's a do you have a person or a program in place at your shelters that offers a step-by-step plan for them to first solve their most base issues, such as getting shelter and then getting food and then getting resume services and interviews and things like that? How do you approach that to get them off their feet or to get them back onto their feet again?
Sure. Well, I can't really speak about any of the shelters that are currently open because I'm not intimately familiar with their operations. But I think that the approach at this facility would be such that folks, when they're ready to and want to access the variety of services that I kind of shared information about, which included employment services and housing placement, that those teams of folks or teams of providers providing those services would be working in tandem with each other to make sure that there is like a wraparound holistic approach to assisting that individual. That's about as specific as I can get at this point.
Okay.
Charles, wouldn't that be part of the HMIS data, which would be shared so that type of service could be identified?
You're speaking about tracking job referrals or referrals to other type of services?
Well, for case management, the information sharing so they could see what type of services an individual would need.
It's certainly possible, there's capacity to do more than what's currently being done. But I guess that it would require some conversation with agencies on what that would look like.
I think that falls along the lines of case management in general. I think typically what people who, if you are placed with case management and you have a good case manager, your case manager is your liaison and link to helping you get services, helping you get transportation to services, and is your transportation to services. So if you have, if you don't have a good case management, or if you don't have good case management, then it's really hard to navigate a lot of things that, and especially if you're new to Asheville with your services, or you have a mental condition that, yeah, so your question is really difficult when if you're supposed to have services and you don't have good case management, then it's really hard to navigate all of those things while you're in shelter, and your shelter time is maybe limited to a year, and you're trying to get through all these things, and then you're under quite a bit of stress, right? So I get your question, and it's a difficult question as to how somebody navigates all that by themselves.
And I think it is, the answer to the question is case management. I mean, it will, based on the recommendations that we received and that this committee has adopted, and our commitment to be bold and not to accept half measures, we're going to be taking a housing first approach. So we will not be requiring that people get all of their issues in order before they are placed in housing, but we will try to place them as much as possible in housing opportunities that include ongoing support, case management, and other services that they can access in the community. Do we have any, we're kind of out of time. I don't want to cut this off because it's a very important discussion. Do we have any other questions from the committee?
I just have a quick question for Lacey. Will the team, as it's assembled now, the shelter team, will that be the team to meet and continue planning and moving forward, or will that change?
I'm not aware of it changing.
Okay.
David, I'd like to make a comment real quick. I think the committee's done an excellent job in putting this together and, looking at the needs and, all the current data that we have. But I'd also like to encourage us, I mean, we kind of understand what the need is, but I'd like to see us understand what the want is too. Because if we go out and do this, and then folks are like, that's receiving the services say, I don't really want that, or I don't think I want to participate in that, then we made a big expenditure for nothing. So between, over the next, couple months, I'd really like to see us make an effort to get out and talk to people, in the encampments and stuff like that, and really understand what they want. And if we, do something like this, are you going to, come in and seek those services out? So I think that's really important for us to understand on the go forward.
Sure, I absolutely agree with that, and I will just say, I think we have at least a little bit of a start on that, because there were additional questions in the pit count this year, specifically about this new shelter and what services folks who are responding to that survey would want to see in that shelter. So I'm really excited to see the answers to that.
Yes.
My statement with the pit count when I asked specific questions was, dream big, tell me everything you want, even if you think it's impossible, tell me what you want. And some of those answers are in there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Hold up just a second, we'll hear from you. Do we have a motion?
I move to endorse the current plan.
Second. All right, it's been moved and seconded, and I promise we're going to hear from you, Concoye. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, I think there's a sub-issue here, which is, we have representatives on this house, on the shelter team from the HIAC. And I assume that nobody has any objection to us continuing in that role in this next phase of planning, including planning things like a detailed analysis of the cost for construction and the operation costs and that sort of thing. Is there anybody who objects to us continuing with that?
I don't object to us continuing, but I think the makeup of the committee might want to be different for this next phase. You know, to answer some of the questions, the class of services, not to make sure that we aren't duplicating services and that sort of thing. I'd like the first meeting of the group to take a moment and determine if there are other people who can attend, or, you know, some way to get these questions, the kind of questions we got today, they're going to be harder for the services that are coming up. And I don't want to wait until the end to hear them. I want to hear them as we're trying to make decisions. So if we could, you know, take a deep breath and maybe get input from the rest of HIAC members offline, if appropriate, that would like to contribute to the next stage or something like that, to have, I just think it's a different committee or an expanded one with people who have expertise about not only the services that are going to need to be offered, but as those services are staffed, what burden does that place on the services that are already in the community? You know, we need to see that whole picture, because that's going to determine salary structure. You know, these are things we learned from the early interviews, and, you know, within the rules of not giving any individual provider an advantage over anybody else. I know that has to be very carefully handled, but I'd like to hear more this early.
So this is where I'd like to say, with COC membership and forming committees, that if you feel like your forte is going to be the shelter work group or a shelter work group, then think about that. If that's where you want to be, that's where you should be. If you want to be in any other work group, that's great too. But your ideas are important and your opinion matters. Right? All right.
It's not lost on me that we have had conversations about the importance of providing stipends for people with lived experience to be at the table, so that we get to the spirit of understanding, are we meeting the needs of, the wants of people? We might come up with an idea in the shelter committee that doesn't meet the needs. I don't expect that would be the goal. But for example, I know Haven for Hope in San Antonio has day shelter and has services. So there's chances to learn, as you are with other groups, what does and doesn't work. But it could definitely be more driven by the people in our community if we were removing a barrier to participation so that people could be at the table.
Okay. I don't hear any objection in that. I do hear some good suggestions, but I don't hear any objections to Jamie, Rick, Lacey, obviously, and I continuing as part of that team to get input broadly and to take the planning effort forward. Correct? Any objection to that? Okay. Can we hold the Ramada till next month? Okay. Does anybody on the committee object to holding the Ramada discussion or update until next month? We're 20 minutes overdue now. And I promised another opportunity for comments, so now's the time for public comments. And if it's related to that last topic, we'll take a note and make sure that we have it.
You asked, Mr. Makalea, you asked something that we wanted.
Yes.
One of the things we wanted was better food at the Code Purple shelters. And something else that might be, is a huge step, but a shelter from the rain, not just from the cold. That's also a problem when it's not, 30 or whatever it is, below freezing. We also want to get out of the rain, yeah. And some sort of late night transportation for people that have to close, but they can't get to the transit on time. Because the Code Purple bus routes, they do have a cutoff, so we can't always get to those. That's all I want to say.
Thank Thank you so much.
Any other public comments? Any other discussion from the committee? Okay, our next meeting is Thursday, March 14th at 9 a.m. Hope to see all of you here. Thank you.
And the 29th for the new one.
On the 29th, definitely the 29th. The next meeting of this committee is the 14th. But for people who are wanting membership in the new organization, there are dates that we've talked about in February as well.
Oh my God, I read my mouth.
Did you go into Ben's